Senator from Florida.
Madam President, some of my Democrat colleagues want you to believe that any opposition to their agenda is evil and unjustified. They've claimed for weeks that mere questions about the $95 billion bill the Senate is now considering are rooted in some radical right-wing, anti-democracy conspiracy. And the liberal press prints these lies as gospel. It has destroyed the Senate and ignores the history of our great nation. One of the first decisions facing our new republic is whether to engage in the conflict raging between French revolutionaries and an alliance of European nations led by Great Britain. As we know, President George Washington ultimately decided to remain neutral in that conflict, knowing that our new nation was not prepared to assume the grand responsibilities of supporting the cause, no matter how noble, while properly attending to the pressing matters facing his new government here at home. America was cash-strapped and war-weary. In the centuries that have passed since that moment, our great nation has evolved. The United States has grown into the leader of the free world, the true global superpower, representing the ideals of liberty, freedom, and democracy, and standing staunchly against oppression and tyranny wherever it is found. We no longer must wrestle with these decisions the ways our founders did, but we still face tremendous domestic challenges that I am sure Washington, Hamilton, and Jefferson could have never imagined in April of 1793. Today, we are once again cash-strapped, and we're war-weary. Like never before, Americans are questioning whether their federal government has lost its way, now fails to represent the people they elected. When you hear story after story of the decisions made by the Biden administration, people said, who made those decisions? Less than 25% of the country believes we're on the right track. 25%. That's not good for government. Decades of politicians in Washington being addicted to earmarks and pushing reckless fiscal policy have decimated the financial health of our great nation. In last year's omnibus, 7,500 earmarks. The United States has more than $34 trillion in debt, soon to exceed $35 trillion, and a budget deficit projected this year of nearly $1.8 trillion. I think when Ronald Reagan got elected, the national debt was less than $1 trillion. Since 2019, the U.S. population has increased just 1.8%. How much do you think our federal budget is up? 1.8% increase in population, what would you think? 5%, 10%, maybe 20%. No, our federal budget is set to increase by 55%. Were federal revenues up last year? 5%, 10%? No, they're down 9%. In the last 3 months, we lost nearly 1.6 million full-time jobs. Now, part-time jobs are up. They're up more than 850,000 as more Americans can't find full-time work. You look at company after company after company doing layoffs. Americans can't find full-time work and have to work multiple jobs to make ends meet. When they put out the real labor statistics numbers, and they say, oh, this number of jobs were created, you think that's a full-time job for a person. That might be a part-time job by the same person, 2 jobs, 3 jobs. Biden's bad economy and reckless policies have created massive inflation. It's up 17% since he took office. It's caused immense pain for families every day, especially our poor families like mine growing up. Go to the grocery store. Look at the cost of food. Go look at the cost of a house, cost of a car. Then look at what the interest rate is the mortgage rate when you want to buy a house, or the interest rate when you want to buy a car, or the interest rate on credit card debt. Unfortunately, the world's evil regimes and tyrants do not wait. They're not going to wait for the United States to be in top fighting and financial shape or fiscal shape to launch their attacks. And the weakness and appeasement of the Biden administration has emboldened them to sow chaos in nearly every corner of the world. Iran and its proxies like Hamas, the Houthis and Hezbollah are waging war against Israel and fighting to destroy the Jewish state and its people. Russia continues its war in Ukraine, creating instability not seen in Europe since World War II. and Communist China continues to threaten the United States and prepare for an invasion of Taiwan that will upend world trade and destabilize the Indo-Pacific even further. I can't imagine why any American would ever buy a product made in Communist China. They steal our job. They send precursors here. 70,000 people die of drug overdoses a year. They threaten our allies like Taiwan. America is weak under President Joe Biden, and our enemies, they know it. That's why American enemies are exploiting us and our great ally, Israel. Look at where we are. There's a land war in Europe. Israel is under constant attack, and evil tyrants like Chinese President Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin are watching and waiting to pounce. The conflict of the Red Sea makes this fact indisputable. The decreasing number of attacks by the Houthi militia in the Red Sea matter to every American family. The attacks are a huge problem because so many vegetables go through this area that are critical to world trade. Right now, companies trying to get goods across the globe have a decision to make. Go through an area with clear and present danger or choose a much longer, more expensive route which will lead to delays, increased costs for consumers. This is all because of Joe Biden's weakness. This is what happens when you let terrorists and their sponsors, like Iran, run rampant and dictate how the world works. The result is always more violence, less scrutiny, less security, and serious consequences for American families in everything from the price of goods to their safety overseas. It's what we see today as Biden's weakness needlessly push America towards World War III. This bill does nothing to hold Iran accountable. Let me repeat that. This bill does nothing, absolutely nothing, to hold Iran accountable. Americans don't want war. But instead of standing up to Iran with a credible deterrent to prevent it, Biden has rewarded them. Biden has rewarded Iran with billions of dollars, which the Iranians have used to enrich their nuclear program and fund terrorist enterprises like Hamas and the Houthis. Before Biden took office, the U.S. oversaw the deployment of more naval assets, which was good for Israel, the U.S., and global commerce. Now he is weakening this posture. Biden started his presidency by removing the Houthis as a foreign terrorist organization. Why? Never could explain it. He did that on February 16, 2021, which was a massive mistake. This has empowered them to raise funds and grow in power as Iran's proxy against Israel. It wasn't until a few weeks ago that the U.S. finally redesignated these terrorist thugs as a foreign terrorist organization. It only happened after week after week after week of the Biden administration tolerating their attacks, which has created danger and disruption to the global economy. The U.S. and capable partners should have stymied these attacks before they started by destroying Houthi assets months ago when they began terrorizing our trade operations. Biden would have been wise to have taken a page from the Trump playbook sooner and acted quickly and early to show us U.S. strength and deter ongoing attacks. For far too long, Biden refused to do any of this because he is a weak president. For a president who ran on multilateral internationalism, Biden has proven completely ineffective in bringing along most of our allies to stand with us in times of conflict. This is the reason the world is at war now. Again, nothing in this bill is going to hold Iran accountable. Absolutely nothing. It pains me to say this because we all want the president to be strong, regardless of their party, but we know Biden will never be capable of being a strong leader. That's just not who he is. He will never really stand up to terrorism, hold our allies responsible to truly stand beside us, not behind us, and show the world the grave consequences of threatening the shared economic and security interests of the U.S. and our allies. U.S. power and engagement ensure the freedom of the seas without interference from bad actors and make the world safer and more prosperous. That has been why Iran is not directly attacking Israel. Currently, the U.S. Navy is the only military force in the world that can see and attempt to control the various battle spaces that exist or could exist. Our superiority and intelligence gathering allow our allies to cooperate in this effort to deter and when necessary, defeat our enemies. Right now, there is a serious disparity in what the U.S. taxpayers contribute towards this critical issue compared to other freedom-loving nations. I believe this needs to be fixed. This bill does nothing to address this issue. The U.S. spends $886 billion a year on defense to protect ourselves and our interests around the world. The European Union spends just $295 billion. On top of that, the U.S. currently has a more than $130 billion trade deficit with the EU. Just as we forced NATO countries to agree to a minimum 2% spending on their own military power, we must insist on support from all these benefiting from our protection of the seas. These nations need to boost military spending and fix these trade deficits with increased purchases of American goods. More importantly, we need a president to hold them to that. This bill does nothing to address these concerns. Iranian proxies in Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen continue to escalate because the Biden administration has shown it will do little to stop them. Communist China, Iran, want to use intimidation tactics to dictate the flow of goods and services around the globe. The U.S. must lead the free world to ensure these bad actors are deterred. We should not do it alone. As President Ronald Reagan said, the key to security and the preservation of our sovereignty is peace through strength. Joe Biden has never said that. His words echoed George Washington's farewell address to the nation and told us that if you want to live in peace, you must prepare for war. Neither of these great leaders were warmongers, but both understood that diplomacy and international agreements without great strength do not secure peace. Rather, it is having the means and the will to deter and defeat enemies that guarantee peace and our sovereignty. While chaos continues abroad, America's national security is also being threatened each and every day by an invasion of single adult males at our own borders. One that President Biden's lawless actions have created, encouraged, and maintained. This has been a self-inflicted wound by Joe Biden. This is the sad reality for a nation under the weak leadership of Joe Biden, and has forced this body to deal with world events in a way that I am sure many of us dislike. I say all this to put the moment we find ourselves in today in the honest context it deserves, but it is so often ignored or purposefully manipulated by Democrats and their allies in the mainstream media. The United States cannot ignore the massive threats we face to our national security and prosperity that I've just outlined. On that, I hope we can all agree. But as this body so often does, especially under the control of our Democrat colleagues, the Senate is about to again fail to meet this moment with responsible and appropriate legislation. Rather than negotiating a bill for border security in the public, we were kept in the dark for months and ultimately failed to negotiate a border security deal with Democrats that could actually get Republican support and pass because it did not require Biden to secure the border. This bill completely fails to deliver what most of our conference supported in tying the disbursement of Ukraine aid to real reductions of illegal immigration at the southern border. This bill was our only chance to get Joe Biden to do his job, our only chance. Voters in Florida, my home state, want a secure border today. They want inflation to cease, and they want better paying full-time jobs. Our Republican conference demanded a secure border before we help Ukraine secure their border. Makes sense. Our Republican conference supported tying the disbursement of Ukraine aid to real reductions of illegal immigration at the southern border. In December, I and my good friend and colleague from Wisconsin, Senator Ron Johnson, wrote an op-ed on this topic. We made clear this is where the Republican conference wanted us to go. Let me read it for you. President Biden's open border policy is a clear and present danger to America. We believe a U.S. president's primary responsibility is to defend the country's citizens and our Constitution. When it comes to border security, he is doing neither. Rather than address and alleviate this clear and present danger, President Biden and his Democratic allies in Congress are the root cause. Although the Biden administration and mainstream media are far from transparent when reporting on the current border crisis, what we do know paints a disturbing reality. Since Biden took office, approximately 9.5 million migrants have illegally entered America. Approximately 3 million have been returned, mostly under pandemic emergency provisions of Title 42. That leaves over 6 million. 6 million have taken up residency in America under Joe Biden. But to put that number in perspective, 31 states have a population less than 6 million. Even though New York City declared itself a sanctuary city, Mayor Eric Adams now asserts that the 100,000 migrants who accepted the invitation will destroy his city. But the 100,000 migrants Mayor Adams claimed will destroy New York City represent less than 2% of the migrants Biden has allowed to enter. The other 98% are dispersed all over America, creating enormous burdens for cities of all sizes. When the Biden administration took over, the border was largely secure. Once in office, the Biden administration claimed President Trump's policies that secure the border were inhumane, and they abruptly reversed course. The very unfortunate result is that Biden's open border policy is now facilitating the multi-billion-dollar business model of some of the most evil people on the planet: sex, drug, and human traffickers. It's hard to believe anybody would want to do that. The depredations caused by this trafficking occur in the shadows and goes largely unreported. Overdose deaths, largely from fentanyl coming through the southwest border, topped 100,000 annually. There's nothing humane about Biden's policies. In addition to its inhumanity, the open border represents a huge national and homeland security threat. Of the 6 million migrants who got in, 1.7 million were detected crossing the border and accounted for as known gotaways. We obviously don't know who these people are or where they currently reside. In a recent hearing of the Senate Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee, of which we are both members, FDI Director Christopher Wray stated in response to my question, "What has now increased is the greater possibility of one of these foreign terrorist organizations directing an attack in the United States. It is time to be concerned." This is Director Wray's words. "We are in a dangerous period," according to Director Wray. "The terrorist threats have elevated in silence since Joe Biden took office." These are all Director Wray's words. With an open border, it's obvious how and where foreign terrorist organizations would insert their fighters into our country. President Biden's failure to secure the border means it's up to Republicans to use any leverage we can, including his administration's desire to provide foreign aid to Ukraine to secure it once and for all. Regardless how anyone feels regarding support for Ukraine, and we are skeptical, we believe securing America's border and protecting our citizens should take precedence. A recent column stated that support for Ukraine combined with, quote, modest immigration reform would be a win-win. With a president who actually wanted to secure the border and could be counted on to faithfully execute the laws Congress passes, that might be true. But unfortunately, we have a lawless administration and a president who wants an open border. Remember when the Supreme Court ruled that an eviction moratorium was unconstitutional? President Biden extended it anyway. SCOTUS also ruled that forgiving student loans was unconstitutional. President Biden continues to forgive them. As a result, the strongest security legislation probably won't work under President Biden. Republicans must insist not only on strong legislative language, but also making any Ukraine funding contingent on achieving benchmarks proving the border is being secured. The metric should be the number of migrants dispersed in America each month, which would include, but not be limited to, migrants encountered, processed, and released, regardless of the waiver or program used, plus the detected gotaways. Each month, the administration will be forced to significantly reduce the number of migrants getting into America, and its ability to disperse U.S. taxpayer money to aid for Ukraine will be tied to achieving those monthly goals. Under existing law, President Trump went from peak to trough of illegal immigration in 12 months, using Remain in Mexico and safe third country agreements in Central America. Using that precedent, releasing aid to Ukraine only as we ramp down to a secure border over a 12-month period is a reasonable expectation. House Republicans should not consider, and Senate Republicans should deny cloture on any Ukraine funding bill that falls short of this requirement. That's what we wrote then, and that's what we believe today. We made our position very clear, and nearly all of our fellow Republican senators agreed with this when we spoke about it in our meetings. We all agreed. I remain interested in negotiating and voting for a bill that secures our border today, stops the flow of drugs across our border so fewer Americans die, and stops more criminals, terrorists, and human traffickers from coming to communities now in a fiscally responsible manner. When I was in business, I negotiated and closed a lot of deals. And I knew that if I couldn't walk away from the table, I would never get a good deal. I also knew that I would never get a good deal if the people sitting across the table from me didn't want the same outcome that I did. We have to walk away from the table until we are negotiating with people who share the same goal as our conference, a secure border today. The result, unfortunately, is what we have before us today, a wildly unaccountable foreign aid package that does absolutely nothing to secure the U.S. southern border and could funnel billions in borrowed money to Hamas terrorists and to the salaries of Ukrainian politicians. This bill claims to address the invasion of Ukraine while ignoring the invasion we face here in the United States. This bill could send billions in borrowed money into Gaza, which is still dominated by the Iran-backed Hamas terrorists who killed 1,200 Israelis and more than 30 Americans. 30 Americans, and are still holding American hostages. I am unapologetically pro-Israel. I've had the honor of visiting Israel 5 times as both Florida's governor and as a U.S. senator. What happened on October 7th horrified the world and struck me personally. 2 of my grandsons were staying with me that morning, and we watched with horror what happened. I told them about my visits to Israel and visits to one of the kibbutz that was really close to the Gaza Strip. In 2019, my wife Ann and I visited Kfar Aza, one of the kibbutz that was a site to a complete massacre. As the early reports were coming out, I was really worried about the kibbutz because of its proximity to Gaza. It's only about a half a mile away. I told my grandsons this. And when I heard the news that it was the site of some of the most horrific and barbaric activities, my heart just sank. I wanted to vomit because I knew so many people there. My wife and I had spent an afternoon there, and it was one of the most peaceful places we'd ever visit. I kept thinking about the moms and kids playing outside and enjoying the warm summer weather. It is gut-wrenching to think of the fate of the families we met that day. I spoke with Chin, the lady who led our tour of the kibbutz, who unfortunately was traveling outside Israel that day and survived. If she had been home, she wouldn't have survived. Most of the people on her street were murdered just because they were Jews. I was able to talk with her, and she had not yet been able to go home. She said it was unclear if she will ever be allowed back. Can you even imagine? So many of us in this chamber are so deeply connected to Israel, and I bet many of you have a story like mine. The day we went to the kibbutz, we walked all around. We walked where they take all their kids to school. We saw it was moms and kids. The dads were all at work. We saw the bomb shelters, which are basically what they were set up for, is for missile attacks. They were telling me stories about how Hamas was sending balloons over, and they would have explosives on them with the hope that kids would grab the balloons and get hurt. We're told that when the missile came, they had 15 seconds to get ready. to get into a bomb shelter. They said the kids learned as soon as the sirens went off to raise their hands because hopefully somebody would pick them up and take them to a bomb shelter. We know people in the IDF who have been called to serve, many from my great state of Florida. We have friends all over Israel who have spent days in bomb shelters as rockets have been launched by terrorists intent on wiping Israel and Jews off the face of the earth. I've met with survivors and hostage families. I can give you one of the stories. A young lady was out the festival, and she'd been to the festival the year before, and she had a great time. So she was going to go this year with her boyfriend, and she invited, I think, every friend she knew to the festival. Every one of her friends was killed, except for 2 that were taken hostage. When I met with her, she didn't know what happened to them, and she's just in shock because every one of her friends is dead, and it's because she invited them. I placed a poster outside my office that features the faces of the hostages being held by Hamas. I'm not going to take it down until they're home. You know, we have these Hamas protesters coming to the Capitol, and they ask for a ceasefire. I think it's great to have a ceasefire the day after every Hamas terrorist is dead. Every terrorist, Hamas terrorist, should be killed. What they've done is despicable. These monsters, if you've seen any of the video, they beheaded children and babies. They raped girls and burned innocent civilians alive. Can you imagine? It's barbaric. They dragged innocent people through the streets and are now holding them as hostages in Gaza, which these terrorists absolutely control. It is unimaginable that the United States would ever consider sending money to a place where we know that will be used to help terrorists who are holding Americans hostages. But that is exactly what this bill does. You know what I don't understand is I've not seen one picture of Joe Biden in the White House Situation Room talking about what he's doing to bring home any American hostages. Not one. I think that first speech he gave when he talked about what happened on October 7th, he talked about hostages like 15 seconds. It's like he does not care. You know, you talk about the things you care about. He never talks about American hostages, ever. So how does it feel to be an American family with a family member that's held hostage in Gaza and knowing that your president doesn't care? And President, I want to make sure everyone understands exactly what I'm saying here, which is a fact. Every dollar that goes to Gaza directly benefits Hamas. How do they pay for all those tunnels? How do they pay for all those rockets? How do they pay for it? They take humanitarian aid and use it to do those things. You saw the attack in Israel. They had humanitarian aid, first aid kits that they took with them. Every day since October 7th, I've been telling the stories of those being held hostage in Gaza by Iran-backed Hamas terrorists. I think it's important that the world never forgets what happened on October 7th. I have a poster outside my office that features the faces of the hostages, and I will not take it down until they're all home. Unfortunately, President Joe Biden has not done the same. I don't understand why the President of the United States isn't speaking every single day. He should be speaking every single day about Americans being held hostage by Hamas terrorists and what he is doing to get them out. The IDF just rescued 2 American hostages in a mission that the Biden administration urged them not to do. Can you imagine? The IDF was urged not to do something by the Biden administration that rescued 2 American hostages. Who does this? What president would do this? What has Biden done to rescue American hostages? Many of my colleagues will recall the name of 9-year-old Emily Hand. Emily and her father, Thomas, lived in the small kibbutz of Be'eri. which was ruthlessly targeted and destroyed Hamas during the attacks. I guess quite a few individuals I met with hostages, people that survived the attack, buried. They just, by the grace of God, were they alive. And they have not been able to go home. In the days immediately following the attacks, Emily's dad was initially told that his daughter, who had spent the night at a friend's house just a few doors down, was killed. Madam President, I'm a father of 2 daughters and a grandfather of 7 grandchildren. Watching this father speak about the murder of his daughter is heart-wrenching. He said to CNN at the time, quote, "They just said we found Emily and she's dead." And what he say? Here's what he said. And I went, "Yes," and smiled because that is the best news of the possibilities that I knew. She was either dead or in Gaza. If you know anything about what they do to people in Gaza, that is worse than death. This is the statement of a father, of a daughter, that thought it would be better for her to be dead than to be a hostage in Gaza. Soon, to his relief and horror, Thomas learned that Emily was in fact alive and being held hostage by Hamas. This beautiful, innocent little girl spent 50 days as a hostage in Gaza. If you go look at the poster outside my office, these are beautiful people, innocent individuals. Well, I'm sure that Thomas thanks God every day to have his little girl back in his arms again. He knows that the child he had on October 6th, that child's no longer alive. Emily will never be the same as she was before she was taken. It's been more than 120 days since the attack, and some parents are still waiting for their children to come home. Can you imagine? Your child's been kidnapped, and you have no idea what's happening to him. All you can assume is the worst. Little baby, Gafir Bibas' first birthday was spent as a hostage in Gaza. His 4-year-old brother, Ariel, who is also still being held hostage. There's a group of individuals that put together milk cartons with the pictures of the hostages, like the kids that were on the missing list for Americans. They've done it and they've distributed these around the country. I've got one in my office with a picture of Ariel, a little 4-year-old boy. Gafir and Ariel's parents have been waiting for more than 4 months to hold their babies again. Now, unfortunately, we have heard horrible reports that these innocent children may no longer be alive. Why has Joe Biden given money to Gazans who are holding American hostages? What American president would do that? Why would we allow Biden to give more money to Gazans who are holding American hostages? You just can't believe this is happening. When will this stop? Why the heck are we allowing Biden to send more money into Gaza in this bill, when we know that every dollar that goes to Gaza funds the terrorism of Hamas? More tunnels, more weapons, more rockets, more destruction. Hamas is there to kill Jews and destroy Israel, our ally. What are we doing to get American hostages released? Do we have a daily report from Joe Biden what he's doing? Do we have a report by General Austin what he's done? Do we have any idea what the Biden administration is doing to get American hostages home? I won't stop stating this fact. Every dollar that goes into Gaza directly benefits Hamas. So Hamas kills Israelis and Americans. They take them hostage, and Joe Biden gives Gazans money that goes to benefit Hamas. You can't make this stuff up. That is the undeniable truth. It's why I've been fighting for years to pass my Stop Taxpayer Funding the Hamas Act, which prevents U.S. tax dollars from going to Gaza unless the Biden administration can certify that not a single cent will go to Hamas. Pretty basic. They hold an American hostage, they shouldn't get money. This isn't a solution in search of a problem. It addresses a very real threat of taxpayer money funding Iran-backed terrorism that seeks to destroy Israel and kill Jews and kill Americans. We cannot allow an American family with a family member being held hostage in Gaza to see their tax dollars go. An American family, your daughter's been held hostage, and your tax dollars go to the same people holding your daughter hostage. Joe Biden's doing that. We've seen reports that the Palestinian Authority has been paying over $300 million a year in monthly salaries to terrorist prisoners and in monthly allowances to families of dead terrorists. You wouldn't think that Joe Biden would want to give any money to the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority, who pays terrorists and their families, should not receive U.S. tax dollars, but this bill will allow more of that. You can't believe this is happening with your tax dollars. In 2021, President Biden's State Department said, quote, "We're going to be working in partnership with the United Nations and the Palestinian Authority to kind of channel aid there in a manner that does its best to go to the people of Gaza." Quote, "Don't do your best. No dollars to terrorists, period." The official went on to say, quote, "As we've seen in life, as we all know in life, there are no guarantees. We're going to do everything that we can to ensure that this assistance reaches the people who need it the most," unquote. $0. Don't do your best. No dollars. The Biden administration thinks the risk of resources going to Hamas terrorists is okay because, quote, "in life there are no guarantees," unquote. I completely reject that. I will not leave anything to chance when it comes to preventing U.S. taxpayer money from being sent to the brutal terrorists that have slaughtered so many Israelis and Americans. American citizens. That's why I wasn't surprised, actually, in August 2021 when the Senate voted 99-0 for my amendment to a budget bill that would have made the Stop Taxpayer Funding of Hamas Act the law of the land. But as we would learn soon after this vote, the Democrats only voted for it because they knew that in the final text of the bill, written by Democrats, my language would be mysteriously missing. They only voted for it because they knew it didn't matter. I've tried twice more since then to pass the legislation in the Senate, and the Democrats have blocked it twice. Why would a Democrat want money to go to Hamas? I don't get it. Look, I know the left has a big problem on its hands as so many Democrats rally for Hamas and against Israel in the streets of liberal cities and on the campuses of America's universities. Now, you would think the Democrats would be eager to show that they don't support Hamas. Instead, they blocked my bill, proving that there is no interest in the Democrat Party to stand up to these people who absolutely hate Israel and hate Jews. That's why I asked earlier today to make my amendment to add to my Stop Taxpayer Funding of Hamas Act to this bill. It's common sense. Democrats blocked even voted on this again today, just a vote. I've listened to my Democrat colleagues talk about how we need a ceasefire and how we need to make sure that the children in Gaza get support. Well, if you want aid to go to the children in Gaza, you would want to make sure it doesn't go to Hamas. And you'd want to expect this administration to do everything they could to make sure money doesn't go to Hamas. But as you've heard, they're going to work at it. But they're going to work in partnership with the Palestinian Authority. What do you think the chance that that's going to work out very well? We've also tried twice to pass a standalone Israel aid bill that would not send money to Gaza, but Democrats blocked that too. Each and every Democrat voted against aid to Israel. So don't tell me or my colleagues who oppose this bill that we don't stand with Israel when Democrats have twice blocked our bill, then all voted against it, which has already passed in the House to immediately send money to Israel. If they had not voted against it, it could have gone to Biden weeks ago, and Israel could have gotten more aid. Madam President, let me be clear on one more thing. Since the day that Vladimir Putin launched Russia's unlawful invasion of Ukraine, I have stood strongly on the side of the Ukrainian people. But there are numerous unanswered questions. We don't know what's happened to the $100 billion of aid that has already gone to Ukraine. We have no idea what our plan is. What's our plan to win? Why would we pay the salaries of Ukrainian politicians with borrowed money? Will Biden give Ukraine the weapons they need to actually win? If so, why didn't he do it in the beginning? When Ukraine could have absolutely destroyed the Russian military that was all sitting ducks along a highway. Why didn't Biden give them the weapons to just absolutely destroy the Russian military? Why not? Why can't Congress pay for this with savings in other areas? And the most important one is, why is the Ukraine border more important than the U.S. border? Why is this bill being rushed through with no support for securing our southern border? Ukraine must win and Russia must lose. There's no question that is what is in the best interest of America's national security. And it's why I have said that we should continue to provide lethal aid to Ukraine, paid for with seized Russian assets, so Ukraine can win its war and have a clear plan for how Ukraine will win. We need to answer these questions and be strategic about how we protect our interests, especially as we add to America's $34 trillion worth of debt, soon to hit $35 trillion. The American people will no longer tolerate borrowing billions of dollars to pay the government expenses and salaries of Ukrainian politicians. We are borrowing money to pay for the Ukrainian politicians. It's not a loan, it's just a gift. Nor will U.S. voters tolerate this government having no plan for how Ukraine will win, how U.S. resources will help it win, and how we are making sure that every dollar spent with one mission in mind, defeating Russia. And concern grows when we see that Ukraine has fired another top military official and seems to be struggling to show a clear path to victory. Without more information, we are left to assume the worst, that this entire bill has no clear mission but to accomplish the appearance of unity so that American politicians can fly over with a giant check and deliver hollow speeches about moral righteousness. It doesn't soothe our concerns when we hear the majority whip say on this floor that we must pass this now so that he can go to Munich this week and pontificate about a bill that the Speaker of the House has repeatedly stated that will never become law. Let me just read what the Speaker said today. House Republicans were crystal clear from the very beginning of discussions that any so-called national security supplemental legislation must recognize that national security begins at our own border. The House acted 10 months ago to help enact transformative policy change by passing the Secure Our Border Act. And since then, including today, the Senate has failed to meet the moment. The Senate did the right thing last week by rejecting the Ukraine, Taiwan, Gaza, Israel immigration legislation due to its insufficient border provisions, and should have gone back to the drawing board to amend the current bill to include real border security provisions that will actually help end the ongoing catastrophe. Instead, the Senate's foreign aid bill is silent on the most pressing issue facing our country. The mandate of national security supplemental legislation was to secure Americans' own border before sending additional foreign aid around the world. Is what the American people demand and deserve. Now, in the absence of having received any single border policy change from the Senate, the House will have to continue to work on its own will on these important matters. America deserves better than the Senate's status quo. So what we're going to do, this bill is going to be rushed through with no amendments. There will not be an amendment on this bill. So a bill that was negotiated in the dark by a few people, changed, only a few people knew that, is now going to pass. And the Speaker of the House has repeatedly stated that it's never going to become law. This bill accomplishes nothing, and if my colleagues were actually serious about aiding Ukraine in its war against Russia's invasion, they would work with us in good faith, sit down with the Speaker of the House and House leaders, and produce a bill that can pass here and in the House. As I said, I want Ukraine to win and I want Russia to lose. But that does not mean I am or should be willing to simply accept any offer thrown down by the Democrats that they claim, but cannot prove, will advance that cause. All while America is being invaded as a result of our open border. So if you're a general and your left flank is being invaded and you do nothing to shore that up, you get fired and you lose the battle. We are being invaded. I will not accept anything that ignores the most urgent threat to U.S. national security, Joe Biden's wide-open southern border. This should not need to be said here on the floor of the United States Senate, but securing America's border is more important than securing the border of any other country. We represent America. We should be able to do both. And frankly, the fact that we aren't using revenue generated from seized Russian assets to pay for Ukraine aid is ridiculous. But that's how things work here. Your federal government cannot continue to stroke massive checks to borrow more money while providing zero accountability to the American people. The people of Florida are sick of this. I'm sick of it. I think about all Americans are sick of this. The deal has always been Ukraine aid for border security. Not immigration policy, but real border security today. Florida families are feeling the impact of this administration's lawless border policies each and every day, as deadly fentanyl criminals, terrorists, human traffickers pour across Biden's open borders. In 2021, how many children, 14 to 18-year-olds, died of fentanyl? Over 1,000, 1,145. That's a classroom of students dying each and every week. In 2022, I heard from a mom in Kissimmee, Florida, whose son was in the Air Force. He came home to visit her and surprise her on Mother's Day weekend. He visited an old friend who he didn't know had begun dealing drugs. The friend convinced the young man to take a Xanax, which was unknowingly laced with fentanyl, and the mom found her son dead. Can you imagine? It's heartbreaking. There are more stories like this all over the country. I don't understand why Joe Biden doesn't care. Over 100,000 Americans died from drug overdoses in 2021. 72% of those from opioids like fentanyl. Families in Florida and every state across the nation are being torn apart by these deadly drugs coming over the border. Think about how many families are being just torn apart as a result of this open border. My Democrat colleagues seem to finally be acknowledging this crisis on TV. But they're not willing to stand up to this president and force him to do what we all know is right: secure the border today. I can't imagine why. It's obvious to everyone that the invasion of our southern border is what Biden wants. Let's take a look at the numbers. Joe Biden was inaugurated on January 20th, 2021. He inherited the most secure U.S. southern border in modern history. Some of his first acts as president, he used his executive power to dismantle the policies that President Trump used to secure the border and send a clear message to the cartels. The border is now wide open for smuggling, and President Biden's not going to do anything to stop it. The surge of illegal immigration started almost immediately. In February 2021, right after Biden was inaugurated, there was more than 101,000 encounters of illegal aliens attempted to cross our southern border between ports of entry. That was a massive increase over what we saw the prior month. From there, the numbers continued to skyrocket. March 21 saw 173,000 encounters with illegal aliens between ports of entry. By July 2021, encounters with illegal aliens between ports of entry skyrocketed more than 213,000. That's more than 213,000 people attempting to illegally enter the United States in just 1 month. I point this out to make something very clear. The border was secure, And then Joe Biden took office, and the cartels got their message loud and clear. The invasion hasn't stopped since. In fiscal year 2022, the first full fiscal year under the Biden administration, there were more than 2.3 million encounters with illegal aliens between ports of entry. These aren't families searching for a better life, they're mostly single adults. Of those 2.3 million encounters with illegal aliens at our southern border, more than 1.6 million were single adults, most of whom are military-aged men. That's 70% of all people trying to illegally enter the United States. Even more terrifying, 98 of the people caught trying to illegally sneak into our country in fiscal year 2022 were on the terror watch list. Here's another terrible stat for you from that period. CBP seized more than 14,000 pounds of fentanyl along the southern border. Now, just 2 milligrams of fentanyl can be a lethal dose. They seized more than 14,000 pounds. That's enough fentanyl to kill 3 billion people. This is how much fentanyl has crossed. Think about how much fentanyl has crossed the border without being seized. In fiscal year 2023, things got worse, and we saw more than 2.4 million encounters with illegal aliens between ports of entry. Again, these aren't families searching for a better life. They're mostly single adults. Of those 2.4 million encounters with illegal aliens at our southern border, 60%, more than 1.5 million, were single adults. Again, most of whom are military-aged men. And 169 people on the terrorist watch list tried to illegally sneak into our country during fiscal year 2023. And the drugs continue to flow into our country. Last fiscal year, CBP seized nearly 27,000 pounds of fentanyl along the southern border. That's enough fentanyl to kill 6 billion people. Last December, 2 months ago, more than 300,000 illegal aliens were encountered trying to unlawfully enter the United States. This is an invasion and in clear and present danger to the safety of every American. Even Al Sharpton called it an invasion on his MSNBC show last week. But Senate Democrats and Joe Biden still won't do what is needed to fix it. Biden's open door policy is a clear and present danger to every American family. I've gone to the border quite a bit. You go down there. So right after Biden took over, I went down there, and you saw the wall being built, and then they didn't finish the gates. Still, it's just laying there. People pour across. I was at one place where, people were just able to, if they could fly into Mexico, they took a bus up to the border, and they just walked across the border. CBP picked them up, and within days, they were anywhere they wanted to be in the United States. Then what we found that they could get on a flight right after they released without any ID. And by the way, they don't have IDs. Go to the Mexico side, there's IDs everywhere. On our side, there's no IDs. On our side, they don't have an ID. They're just given an ICE arrest warrant, and they can go on a commercial flight with you. And the Biden regulations say they don't have to have an ID. They don't have to have a picture. They can decline the ability, they can say they don't want their picture taken. But you try that. An American can't do that. You wouldn't get on the flight. This is a reality that Joe Biden refuses to go see. I want to mention one more thing I talked about earlier again, because this really needs to be driven home. My Democrat colleagues want to act like any criticism of the Biden administration is just Republican attacks, but here's what the FBI director told me just a few months ago. In a hearing on the Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee last October, I questioned FBI Director Christopher Wray about the threats that we are facing because of Joe Biden's open border. In his response to me, Director Wray said, quote, "We went through a period where the traditional structured foreign terrorist organization threat in the U.S. subsided some in favor of this ISIS-inspired, let's say, attack. To be clear, that threat has not gone away. What has now increased is the greater possibility of one of these foreign terrorist organizations directing an attack in the United States," unquote. He went on to say, quote, "It is time to be concerned. We are in a dangerous period," end of the quote. He also said that since Joe Biden took office, quote, the terror threats have elevated. Those are the words of FBI Director Christopher Wray. How can anyone ignore what he said? At one point, are my colleagues on the left going to be serious about this? I think the answer, unfortunately, is never. The so-called border bill they negotiated in secret wasn't an honest attempt to do anything on the border. And when it was clear that the bill they wrote would fail, they totally abandoned the idea of border security and immediately moved to the bill before us today, which will never pass in the House, will never become law, and does nothing on the border. Let's remember what Speaker Johnson says. House Republicans were crystal clear from the very beginning of the discussions that any so-called national security supplemental legislation must recognize that national security begins at our own border. It will not pass the House. The people of Florida refuse to ignore these threats that are in clear and present danger to the safety and security of the United States. We will not pretend that it is okay to take care of the border in Ukraine while doing nothing to stop the invasion we have right here in the United States. Madam President, I want to get something done, and I will always believe in the ability of our nation to answer the call and defend freedom and democracy wherever it is threatened by tyranny. I care deeply about protecting the national security of the United States. It's really very personal to me. At 18 years old, I enlisted in the Navy to defend my country. My adoptive father was one of 3,000 American soldiers who did all 4 combat jumps with the 82nd Airborne and then fought in the Battle of the Bulge. I know there's evil in the world, and America must be the leader of the free world. There's no one else to rely on. But we have to take care of the families we represent first. We have to secure our border. This bill does not secure our border and has too many failures to say it will do what's needed to protect America and our interests. The bill allows Biden to send billions to Gaza, which will go straight to Hamas terrorists, and billions to pay the salaries of Ukrainian politicians. We all know no bill is perfect, it's impossible. But this bill is a horrible attempt to basically spend American dollars with no accountability and to do nothing to secure the American border. Thank you, Madam President.